The woman's hand shot out and clamped around Caleb Walker's wrist, yanking him so hard his backpack slipped off one shoulder. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Pretend you're my husband for the next 40 minutes. He had never seen her before in his life, a stranger in a $2,000 suit, gripping the arm of a worn-out Navy veteran begging. And here's what nobody in that terminal could have guessed: 40 minutes later, this desperate lie would crack open the most guarded heart in Seattle. Before we go on, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels. And if second chances still move, you subscribe and stay with me to the very end. At 6:42 in the evening, Caleb Walker was counting the minutes until he could hold his daughter again. That was the whole of his ambition that night. Not money, not comfort, just Emma's arms around his neck and the smell of her strawberry shampoo when she buried her face in his shoulder and said the words she said every single time he came home: "You came back." 3 years and she still said it like she wasn't sure he would. He couldn't blame her. Caleb shifted the strap of his backpack higher and moved with the slow current of travelers toward the security checkpoint. In his left hand, held loosely, but never carelessly, was a small stuffed rabbit with one ear stitched crooked. Emma had pressed it into his palm 4 days ago at the front door. "So you don't get lonely, Daddy," she'd said. "I won't get lonely. I've got you in here." He'd tapped his chest. Take him anyway. So he'd taken the rabbit on a 4-day contracting job 3 states away, and he'd set it on the nightstand of a motel room every night, and more than once at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling. He'd looked at that crooked-eared rabbit and thought, "This is my whole life now. And it's enough. It has to be enough." He believed that. Most days. Caleb Walker was 41 years old. He had given 12 years to the United States Navy. He had stood watch on the deck of a destroyer in seas that could swallow a man whole, followed orders that made no sense until they saved lives and carried the weight of friends who never made it home. He knew what fear smelled like. He knew what courage cost. He knew that the loudest men were rarely the bravest ones. But none of that, not 1 hour of it, had prepared him for the day the base chaplain called him into a small room and told him his wife had collapsed at the grocery store and was gone before the ambulance even reached her. 29 years old. A blood clot no one saw coming. A woman who had been laughing on the phone with him that very morning about Emma losing her first tooth. That was the war Caleb never talked about. The one he was still losing quietly every single day. He'd been a father and a mother ever since. He packed lunches before the sun came up. He learned to braid hair from a video on his phone, cursing under his breath while Emma giggled at him in the mirror. He worked whatever jobs let him be home by the time the school bus dropped her off, and when the money got thin, which was most months, he took the long jobs, the ones out of state, and he hated every hour of them because every hour was an hour he wasn't there. Somewhere in those 3 years, without deciding to, Caleb had stopped believing he would ever have a life of his own again. Love was a door he had closed, locked, bricked over. Not out of bitterness, out of exhaustion, out of the simple math of a man who had one heart and had already given all of it away to a wife in the ground and a daughter who still asked if he was coming back. So when he walked through that terminal, he wasn't a man looking for anything. He was just trying to get home, and that is exactly the kind of man life ambushes. He felt the hand before he understood it. Fingers cold, strong, desperate, closing around his forearm and pulling. His body reacted the way 12 years had trained it to react. He turned weight already shifting to the balls of his feet. Free hand coming up, eyes finding the threat. Except it wasn't a threat. It was a woman. She was maybe 32, 33. Dark hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. A charcoal suit that fit her like it had been sewn onto her body. Heels. A leather bag that probably cost more than Caleb's truck. Everything about her said money control, a woman who walked into rooms and made people sit up straighter. And her eyes said none of that. Her eyes said she was drowning. "Please," she whispered. "I know how this sounds. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to do it right now." Caleb glanced down at the hand still gripping his arm, then back up at her face. "Ma'am," he said slow and even, "you've got the wrong person. I don't. I promise you I don't." She looked over her shoulder, a quick frightened glance toward the arrivals corridor, then back at him. "I need you to pretend you're my husband. For the next 40 minutes. That's all. 40 minutes. For a moment, Caleb genuinely thought he'd misheard her. "You need me to what?" "Pretend to be my husband." Her words tumbled out fast now, like a dam giving way. "My grandmother is landing in 8 minutes. She's flying in from Boston. She's 81 years old, and she has a heart condition, and she is walking through that gate, expecting to meet the man I've been telling her for 2 years that I married, and I don't have a husband. I don't have anyone. And if she finds out I lied..." Her voice cracked clean in half. "It'll break her. It'll actually break her. And I can't do that to her. I can't." Caleb stared at her. Every rational instinct in his body told him to peel her fingers off his arm. "Say I'm sorry, ma'am. I hope it works out, and keep walking toward his gate. He was a father. He had a daughter waiting." Responsible men did not walk into a stranger's lie 8 minutes before it detonated. A soldier recognized a setup when he saw one. "Look," he said, keeping his voice gentle because she was clearly coming apart. "I don't know what's going on with you, and I'm sorry you're in a tough spot, but I'm not the guy for this. I've got a flight. I've got a kid at home. Ask somebody at the..." "I don't want somebody." She said it so fiercely it stopped him. "I've been standing here for 20 minutes watching people walk by. Businessmen, college kids, a guy who wouldn't stop staring at my chest, and then I saw you." Her grip tightened, not to control him, but to hold on the way a person holds on to the last solid thing in a flood. "You look like someone she'd believe. You look like someone good." Caleb almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was the strangest thing anyone had said to him in 3 years. "You look like someone good." Nobody said things like that to him anymore. People looked at Caleb Walker and they saw the story before they saw the man. Poor guy lost his wife. Single dad must be hard. Veteran, thank you for your service, here's your discount. He had become a collection of sympathetic labels, a situation people felt bad about for 8 seconds and then forgot. Invisible. That was the word for it. He had become invisible in the exact shape of a man everyone claimed to admire. And now, here was a stranger gripping his arm, looking straight through all of it, and telling him she'd chosen him. Not what he could give her, not what he had. Him. "What's your name?" he heard himself ask. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise maybe that he hadn't shaken her off. Sophia Bennett. Caleb Walker. He didn't offer his hand. She was already holding his arm. "Sophia, I'm going to ask you a straight question, and I need a straight answer because I don't lie for people I don't trust. You in some kind of danger?" "No." She shook her head quickly. "No, it's nothing like that. It's God, it's so much stupider than that." A short, broken laugh escaped her. "I'm not running from anyone. I'm not in trouble with the law. There's no scam. There's no money. I'm not going to steal your kidney." Another laugh wet her this time. "I'm just a coward who told my grandmother a lie 2 years ago because I couldn't stand the look on her face, and I kept telling it, and it grew, and now it's about to walk off a plane, and I don't know how to stop it." Caleb studied her. 12 years of reading faces under pressure. Men lying about their orders. Men terrified they'd freeze when it counted. Men pretending they weren't scared while their hands shook. He knew the difference between a person running a con and a person running out of road. Sophia Bennett was out of road. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said. Sophia blinked. "What? Your grandmother? 8 minutes, you said, so talk fast. If I'm going to be somebody's husband for 40 minutes, I need to know who I'm doing it for." He paused. "Not for you. For her. There's a difference, and I need you to understand that difference before I say yes." And just like that, something in the woman changed. The Polish cracked. The CEO evaporated. What was left was just a person tired, frightened, and unbearably grateful. "Her name is Eleanor," Sophia said. "Eleanor Bennett. She raised me." So, the words came out of Sophia in a rush, the way things do when a person has held them too long. My parents divorced when I was 7. My mother, Margaret, she's flying in too. She's already here, actually. She's around here somewhere getting coffee. My mother was busy building her own life, and my father just kind of disappeared into his. And Eleanor took me. Not because she had to, because she wanted me. Sophia's throat worked. She used to make me pancakes on Sunday and cut them into the shape of stars because I said regular pancakes were boring. She sat in the front row at every recital, even when I was terrible. When I told her at 19 that I wanted to start a company and everyone said I was insane, she took the ring off her own finger and pawned it to give me my first $4,000. And the company, it worked. Sophia said it without pride, almost apologetically. It worked really well. I run a company now that's worth a lot of money. Hundreds of people work for me. I fly all over the world. I have everything I ever told her I wanted. Except, Sophia looked at him. You said you have everything you ever told her you wanted, Caleb said quietly. So there's an except. There always is. For a second, she didn't answer. When she did, her voice was very small, except she doesn't care about any of it. The money, the company, the none of it. There's only one thing Eleanor ever wanted for me, and it's the one thing I could never give her. She wanted to know I wasn't alone, that before she... Sophia stopped, swallowed. She's not well, Caleb. Her heart. The doctors have been careful with their words, but I'm not stupid. This might be the last time she flies out to see me, and the last thing she wants, the only thing she wants, is to know that when she's gone, I won't be by myself. So you told her you got married. I told her I got married. Sophia closed her eyes. 2 years ago. On the phone. She was crying, she was so happy. And I heard how happy she was, and I couldn't take it back. And then she wanted details, so I gave her details. A wedding that never happened. A honeymoon I made up. A husband named, she winced, named David, who travels a lot for work, which is very convenient, because it explains why he's never around when she calls. David? Caleb repeated it flatly. You don't have to be David. She's never seen David. I never sent pictures. I said he was private camera shy, some nonsense. She has no idea what he looks like. All she knows is that I married a good man who takes care of me. Sophia opened her eyes and looked directly into his. So all you have to be is a good man who takes care of me, for 40 minutes. And then you walk to your gate, you fly home to your kid, and you never think about any of this again. Caleb was quiet. He was thinking about a lot of things in that silence. He was thinking about the fact that lying didn't sit right with him, never had. He was thinking about Emma and the flight and the responsible thing. But mostly, he was thinking about an 81-year-old woman with a bad heart, who had pawned her wedding ring for a scared 19-year-old girl, and who was right now 30,000 feet in the air, descending toward the happiest moment she thought she had left. And he was thinking about something the chaplain had said to him 3 years ago in that small room when Caleb's whole world had just ended. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is carry a weight that isn't his, so somebody else doesn't have to. There are 3 seconds, Caleb said finally, in every hard thing I've ever done where I get to decide who I am. This is one of them. Sophia stared at him. Is that a yes? Sit down. He nodded toward a bank of empty chairs near the arrivals gate. We've got maybe 6 minutes. That's not enough to build a marriage, but it's enough to keep me from getting us both caught. Talk. They sat. Sophia let go of his arm for the first time, and Caleb noticed the red marks her fingers had left, and he noticed too that she noticed them and murmured, sorry. And he said, don't be. I've been grabbed harder for worse reasons. She almost smiled. Almost. Okay, she said, pulling herself together, business creeping back into her voice now that she had a problem to solve. The basics. We've been married 2 years. We met at a coffee shop, Caleb said. Sophia blinked. Why a coffee shop? Because if your grandmother asks how we met, I need a story I can tell the same way twice, and coffee shop is easy to remember. I ordered wrong, you fixed my order, we started talking. That's it. Simple stories survive. Complicated stories fall apart. He glanced at her. First rule of a good cover: keep it boring and keep it true wherever you can. Sophia looked at him with something new in her expression. You've done this before. I've done things like this before. He didn't elaborate. What's her name for you? Grandmothers have names for their grandkids. Sophie Bug. Sophia's cheeks colored slightly. She calls me Sophie Bug. Good. If she calls you that, I don't react. I don't think it's weird. I've heard it 1,000 times. What do I call you? I don't know. What do husbands call? I'll call you Soph. Caleb said it like he'd been saying it for years. Not Sophia. Sophia's what strangers call you. I'll call you Soph, and you'll call me. He thought about it. You'll call me by my name, Caleb, not David. Sophia's eyes widened. She thinks his name is David. Then she's going to be a little confused for about 4 seconds, and you're going to say, Grandma, I know I said David, but everybody calls him by his middle name. It's a whole thing. And then we move on. Because I'm not answering to a dead lie. If I'm going to look that woman in the eye, I'm going to do it with my own name. That's my one condition. His voice was quiet, but there was no give in it. I'll wear the story. I won't wear a fake name. A man's name is the one thing that's still his when everything else is gone. Sophia opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Okay, she said. Caleb. Middle name. Got it. What do you do that I'd know about because a husband knows his wife's work? I run. In plain words, not the pitch, not what you tell investors. What would I say if your grandmother asked, what does Sophie Bug's company do? Sophia paused, and for a second she looked almost lost, like no one had ever asked her to explain herself simply before. We build software that helps hospitals keep track of patients, so people don't fall through the cracks. So a nurse always knows who needs help and when. Caleb looked at her. That's good work, he said, and he meant it. Something moved across her face, surprise again, that stubborn recurring surprise, like a woman unused to being told the plain truth about herself. It's thank you, she said. Nobody really thank you. Now me. Caleb kept them moving. Your grandmother's going to want to know about me, so here's what's true, and we're going to use true wherever we can. I was in the Navy, 12 years. That's real, and it'll hold up because I lived it. I do contracting work now, construction building things, fixing things. That's real too. I've got a daughter, 7 years old. Her name is Emma. Sophia went still. You have a daughter, she said softly. I do. And her mother? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Her mother passed, he said. 3 years ago. He watched it land on her. Watched the practiced apology start to form on her lips. The I'm so sorry that people always said, the 8-second sympathy, and watched her stop herself before it came out, as if she'd suddenly understood he didn't want it or wouldn't know what to do with it. Instead, she said very quietly, That's why you understand. Understand what? Why I can't let Eleanor down. Sophia's eyes were bright. You know what it is to love someone you can't protect from the worst thing. You know. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have to. She'd seen straight through him the same way he kept seeing through her, and neither of them quite knew what to do with that. A voice crackled over the terminal speakers. Now arriving at gate B14, flight 229 from Boston. Sophia went white. That's her, she breathed. That's her flight. Oh God, that's her flight. And Caleb Walker, single father, Navy veteran, a man who had closed the door on his own life 3 years ago and bricked it over, felt his heart begin to pound the way it used to before something that mattered. Hey, he turned to her. Look at me, Sophia. Look at me. She dragged her eyes to his. Breathe, he said. In through your nose. Slow. There you go. You're not going to fall apart in front of her because she spent your whole life believing you're the strongest person she knows, and she is right, and you are not going to prove her wrong in the next 40 minutes. You hear me?" Sophia nodded, sucking in a shaking breath. "We're just two people who love each other waiting for Grandma to get off a plane. That's all this is. That's all it has to be." He softened. "Can you do that?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I've never had anyone standing next to me for the hard parts. I'm always alone for the hard parts." Caleb held out his hand. Not for the story. Not for the con. He held it out because she looked like a woman about to walk out onto a battlefield by herself, and he was tired, bone-tired, 3 years tired of watching good people face hard things alone. "You're not alone for this one," he said. "Take my hand." Sophia looked at his hand. Rough scarred across 2 knuckles, the hand of a man who built things and carried things and had buried the woman he loved with it. She took it. And the strangest thing happened. The moment her fingers closed around his, some of the terror drained out of her shoulders. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to stand. Enough to breathe. Enough to turn toward the gate where an old woman was about to appear and lift her chin and become for 40 minutes a woman who was not alone in the world. "There's one more thing," Sophia said quickly, her voice low and fast. "My mother's here. Margaret. She went to get coffee, but she'll be back any second, and she—" "Caleb, she is not going to like this. She doesn't know I lied. She knows I'm not married. She thinks she doesn't know what I'm about to do." Caleb's jaw tightened. "So your own mother's going to be standing there watching me pretend to be your husband, knowing it's a lie. She'll play along. She has to. For Eleanor's sake, she'll play along. But she's going to hate it, and she's going to hate you, and she is going to test you." Sophia's grip tightened on his hand. "She's the smartest, coldest person I know, and she has spent my entire life waiting for me to fail. If there is a crack in this, she will find it. Then we won't give her a crack. You don't understand. She'll ask you things, impossible things. Things a real husband would know and you can't possibly—" "Sophia." Caleb turned and looked at her calm as still water. "I have stood in front of men who could have ended my life if I gave the wrong answer. I've kept my voice level when everything in me wanted to run. One angry mother with a cup of coffee does not scare me." A ghost of a smile. "Let her test me. Some tests you don't pass by knowing the answers. You pass by being the kind of man the answer's about." Sophia stared at him, and down the long corridor from gate B14, the first passengers began to appear. The businessmen with rolling bags, the college kids with earbuds, the young mother wrestling a stroller. And then near the back, moving slowly, came a wheelchair. An airline attendant pushed it. And in it sat a small, silver-haired woman in a lavender cardigan, a woman with a face lined by 81 years of living. A woman whose eyes, even from this distance, were already searching the crowd, already hungry, already lit up with a hope she had carried across the entire country. "That's her," Sophia whispered, and her hand trembled inside Caleb's. "That's Eleanor." Caleb looked at the old woman, and something shifted in his chest, something that had been locked for 3 years, something he thought was gone for good. Because he knew that look on her face. That searching, hoping, please let it be true look. It was the look of someone who had loved hard and lost much, and was reaching one more time for a reason to believe that the people she loved would be okay after she was gone. It was the look he saw on his own face in the mirror sometimes at 2 in the morning when he checked on Emma while she slept. "Okay," Caleb said quietly, and he squeezed Sophia's hand once, steady sure. 40 minutes. The old woman's eyes swept across the waiting crowd, searching, searching. And then they found them, and Eleanor Bennett's whole face broke open into a smile so full of joy, so free of doubt, so completely heartbreakingly certain that Caleb Walker felt his throat close. "Sophie Bug," the old woman called out, her thin voice carrying across the terminal, one frail hand rising into the air. "There she is, and oh, look at him, look at him, there he is." Sophia made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Hi, Grandma." she called, waving her voice cracking on the word. Hi, we're right here. We. Caleb heard her say, we, and he felt the words settle over both of them like something with weight. He had walked into that terminal, a man who had stopped believing he was part of any we at all. A man who thought his best years were behind him. A man who had convinced himself that surviving was the most he could ask for, and now a stranger's hand was locked in his, and an old woman was reaching for him across a crowded airport, like he was the answer to a prayer she'd been praying for 2 years. And somewhere in the noise and the light and the pounding of his own heart, Caleb Walker realized something that frightened him more than any storm he'd ever weathered at sea. For the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt seen, and as the attendant wheeled Eleanor closer, and the old woman's trembling arms reached up, and Sophia's grip on his hand went tight as iron, Caleb stepped forward, not as an actor, not as a hired stranger, but as a man who had just remembered in the space of 40 desperate minutes that his heart was not dead after all. It had only been waiting. He knelt down beside the wheelchair, and he took Eleanor Bennett's frail spotted hand in both of his, and he looked into the shining eyes of the woman who had raised the frightened girl beside him, and he said in a voice thick with a truth he hadn't planned to feel, "Ma'am, it is the honor of my life to finally meet you." And Eleanor Bennett wept. She wept with joy. She had no idea. None of them did not yet that the man kneeling in front of her, the man she believed had married her Sophie bug, was a stranger who had agreed to this lie only minutes before. And she had no idea that standing 20 feet away, a paper coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips, Margaret Bennett had just watched the entire thing. Watched her daughter grip a stranger's hand. Watched him kneel. Watched him lie. And Margaret's eyes cold and sharp and missing, nothing narrowed to slivers, as she began slowly deliberately to walk toward them. Margaret Bennett covered the distance in a dozen unhurried steps, and every one of them landed like a verdict. "Well?" she said, stopping just behind the wheelchair, her voice bright as glass and twice as sharp. "Isn't this a picture?" Sophia's spine went rigid. "Mom." "Sophia." Margaret's smile never wavered, but her eyes moved to Caleb the way a jeweler's eyes move to a stone she suspects is paste. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your husband? I feel like I've heard so little about him." Caleb rose from beside the wheelchair slow and easy, and he didn't let go of Eleanor's hand until the old woman released his first. Then he turned, and he offered that same hand to Margaret, and he said in a voice with no tremor in it at all, "Ma'am, Caleb, it's good to finally put a face to Sophia's mother. She's got your eyes." "Does she?" Margaret took his hand. She shook it once firm, and held it a beat too long, and Caleb understood in that single second everything Sophia had tried to warn him about. This woman was not going to shout. She was not going to make a scene. She was going to smile at him across a crowded terminal and take him apart one polite question at a time, and she was going to do it right in front of the old woman she loved because she believed she knew that whatever this was, it was a lie and she intended to prove it. "Caleb," she repeated, letting his name sit in her mouth like she was tasting it. "That's funny. I could have sworn Sophia said his name was David." The silence that dropped over the four of them lasted less than 2 seconds, but Caleb felt Sophia stop breathing beside him. Eleanor looked up from her wheelchair, her lined face crinkling. "David?" "It's a whole thing, Grandma." Sophia started the words coming out too fast. "I told you his name is Caleb David Walker," Caleb said, and he said it calmly, and he said it like a man who had said it his entire life. "David was my father's name. My mother called me David when I was small to honor him. Everybody else called me Caleb. Sophia met me through work friends who only ever knew me as David, so that's the name she had for me back when she was telling her grandmother about me." He looked down at Eleanor with a gentleness that was not manufactured. "I should have straightened it out a long time ago, ma'am. I'm sorry for the confusion. But if it's all the same to you, I'd be proud to have you call me Caleb. It's the name I answer to." Eleanor's eyes went soft and wet. "Caleb David," she murmured, "after your father." "Yes, ma'am." "That's lovely. That's a lovely thing to do for your mother." She reached up and patted his forearm, and then she turned her shining face toward her daughter-in-law and said, "Margaret, isn't that lovely?" He named himself after his father to make his mother happy. Margaret's smile tightened by a single degree. "Lovely," she agreed. And Caleb, without turning his head, felt Sophia's hand find his again and grip it hard, grateful disbelieving. He'd taken the trap Margaret had laid and turned it into a story about a man honoring his family, and there was nothing Margaret could do with it except file it away and reload, which she did immediately. "You'll have to forgive me," Margaret said, moving around to the side of the wheelchair so she could see all three of them at once, so she could watch Caleb's face, while Eleanor watched it too. "I'm a curious woman. It's a terrible habit. But you understand my daughter is very precious to me, and she married in such a hurry, and I never got to know the man who swept her off her feet. So you'll indulge an old mother a few questions." "You're not old, Margaret," Eleanor said fondly. "Older than I look, Eleanor. Caleb, you'll indulge me. Ask me anything you want, ma'am." Caleb pulled a chair around so it sat beside Eleanor's wheelchair, and he settled into it, and he did the thing that a nervous man never does. He got comfortable. He leaned back. He set his worn backpack on the floor and rested the little crooked-eared stuffed rabbit on his knee, and he waited open and unhurried like a man with nothing to hide and all the time in the world. But I'll warn you now, I'm not much of a talker. So if my answers come out short, it's not because I'm dodging. It's just how I'm built. Short answers are fine. Margaret's eyes flicked to the rabbit on his knee and away. "How did you two meet?" "Coffee shop," Caleb said. "I ordered wrong. She fixed my order." Sophia let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "He ordered a large black coffee and told the barista to make it strong, like that meant anything." "It means something in the Navy," Caleb said mildly. "It means nothing at a coffee shop, Caleb." "I know that now. You told me." Loudly, in front of a line of people. Eleanor laughed a delighted, wheezing little laugh and clapped her hands together. "She corrected you." "Oh, that is exactly what she'd do. She's been correcting people since she was 4 years old. She once corrected her kindergarten teacher on the number of moons Jupiter has." 67 at the time, Sophia said. "She had it wrong." "See?" Eleanor beamed at Caleb. "See what you married." "I do, ma'am." Caleb looked at Sophia, and for a moment something passed between them that neither of them had rehearsed, something that hadn't been in the script they'd built in 6 frantic minutes. "I see exactly what I married." Margaret watched the look pass between them, and her jaw set. "That's sweet," she said. "Now, your first anniversary. Where did you spend it?" There it was, the question with no answer. The question they had never built a story for. Caleb felt Sophia go, absolutely still, felt the panic rising off her like heat, and he understood in a heartbeat that this was the real test, the one Margaret had been building toward the whole time, the trap with actual teeth. He didn't rush. He looked down at the stuffed rabbit on his knee, and he turned it over once in his rough hands, and then he lifted his eyes to Margaret and he said, "You know what, ma'am? I'm going to be honest with you, because you seem like a woman who can smell a rehearsed answer from across a room, and I'd rather not insult you with one." Margaret's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "By all means. I don't remember the details of every anniversary." Caleb's voice was quiet and even and completely without apology. "I couldn't tell you which restaurant we sat in, or what I bought her, or where we spent the night. I'm not that kind of man. I never was." He set the rabbit down gently on his knee again. "I forget dates. I forget the names of the fancy places. My late wife used to get after me about it. She'd say, 'Caleb, you'd forget your own head.' And she was right." Sophia's breath caught at my late wife. It wasn't in the story. It was true, and it landed in the middle of the lie like a stone dropped into still water. And Caleb watched Margaret's eyes narrow, because she'd heard it too, and she didn't yet know what to do with a man who told the truth in the middle of a performance. "But here's what I do remember," Caleb went on, and now his voice dropped lower, and even Eleanor leaned in, and even the noise of the terminal seemed to pull back. "I remember the important ones. I remember the people I love. I remember the promises I keep. I remember the mornings I got up before the sun so somebody I love could sleep another hour. I remember every single time somebody needed me, and I was there." He looked at Margaret without flinching. "So if you're asking me to prove I love your daughter by telling you what hotel we stayed in on some anniversary 2 years ago, I'm going to disappoint you, ma'am. Because I can't. But if you're asking whether I'm the kind of man who'd walk through fire for the people he's responsible for, that I can answer. And I don't need a story for it. I just need you to look at me." Nobody spoke. Eleanor's eyes were streaming, now silent tears rolling down her lined cheeks, and she reached out and took Caleb's hand again and held it against her heart. And Margaret Bennett. Cold, sharp, missing nothing. Margaret stared at the stranger in the navy jacket, and for the first time since she'd walked over with her coffee, she didn't have a question ready, because that had not been the answer of a man reciting a script. That had been the answer of a man who had lost someone, a man who knew in his bones what mattered and what didn't. You could fake a wedding date. You could fake a coffee shop. You could not fake the particular gravity in a widower's voice when he talked about the mornings he got up before the sun. Margaret had come to that airport certain she was going to expose a liar. She had not come prepared to meet a man who was telling the truth about everything except one thing. "Well?" she said at last, and her voice had lost some of its glassy brightness. "That's quite a speech." "It wasn't a speech, ma'am." Caleb held her gaze. "You asked me a real question. I gave you a real answer, that's all." Sophia let out a long, shaking breath and pressed the back of her free hand against her mouth, and Eleanor patted Caleb's hand where it rested against her chest and said, thick with emotion, Sophie Bug, come here. Come to your grandmother." Sophia knelt down beside the wheelchair, and Eleanor took her granddaughter's face in both trembling hands and looked at her the way you look at someone you've loved your whole life and might not see many more times. "I have prayed for this," the old woman whispered. "Do you know that every night, I have gotten down on these bad knees every single night, and I have asked God for one thing. Not money, not health for myself, I've had my time. I asked him to let me live long enough to know you wouldn't be alone. That's all. That's the only thing I ever wanted for you, Sophie Bug. Since you were 7 years old, and your mother and father split you down the middle like a wishbone, all I ever wanted was to know that one day somebody would love you the way you deserve to be loved." Her thumb stroked Sophia's cheeks. "And now here he is. Here he is sitting right here telling your terrifying mother the truth to her face. Do you know what a rare thing that is, a man who'll do that?" Sophia was crying now, too openly, silently, and she couldn't answer, so she just nodded against her grandmother's hands. And Caleb Walker, sitting in that plastic airport chair with a child's stuffed rabbit on his knee, felt something crack open in his chest that had been sealed shut for 3 years because he was watching a lie he'd agreed to for 40 minutes, and it was doing something no lie should ever be able to do. It was healing somebody. He watched the joy pour out of that old woman like water from a broken dam. He watched 2 years of a scared girl's fear meet 2 years of a grandmother's prayers, and he watched them cancel each other out, and he understood with a force that startled him that Sophia had not been lying to protect herself at all. She had been lying to protect the one person who had never once let her down. She had built an entire fiction, not out of vanity, but out of love, and Caleb, who had spent 12 years learning the difference between the things worth protecting and the things worth abandoning, felt something in him bend toward her that had nothing to do with the story they'd agreed to. "Margaret," Eleanor said, releasing Sophia's face and looking up. "Come here. Come look at your daughter's husband properly. Stop treating him like a suspect in one of your terrible crime shows." "I don't watch crime shows, Eleanor." "You do. You watch 3 of them. I've seen the little cards on your television." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Come. Sit. We have 20 minutes before they take me to my next gate, and I intend to spend every one of them looking at this young man and hearing about my great-grandchild. Sophie Bug, you didn't tell me he had a daughter." Sophia froze mid-breath. He has a daughter," Margaret said slowly, and her sharp eyes swung back to Caleb, and Caleb saw a new light kindle in them, because here was a fresh thread to pull. Here was a place the lie might finally unravel. "Do you, Caleb? You have a daughter." And Caleb understood the danger instantly. A child was not a wedding date. A child could not be waved away with a story about a coffee shop. If he said yes, Margaret would ask her name her age, whether Sophia was her mother, whether they lived together 100 questions with 100 sharp edges, and every one of them was a place where the whole thing could come down. He could lie. He could say no. But the little rabbit sat on his knee, and the little rabbit had a name, and the little girl who owned it was waiting 3 time zones away, saying you came back into his shoulder, and Caleb Walker had made himself one promise. 3 years ago at his wife's grave, that he had never broken not once, not for anything. He would never be ashamed of his daughter, not to save himself, not to save anyone, never. "I do," Caleb said. Sophia closed her eyes. "Her name is Emma." Caleb went on steady as bedrock. "She's 7 years old. She's got a laugh that's too big for her body, and a stubborn streak she did not get from me, and she is the single best thing I have ever done in my life." He lifted the crooked-eared rabbit off his knee and held it up gentle in his big scarred hand, and he showed it to the old woman like it was made of glass. "She gave me this before I flew out, told me to take it so I wouldn't get lonely. He's been sleeping on the nightstand of a motel room for 4 nights, so a 7-year-old wouldn't worry about her daddy being sad." His voice roughened just slightly, just enough. "So yes, ma'am. I have a daughter, and I don't hide her from anybody, and I never will." Eleanor made a small broken sound and pressed her hand to her mouth. But it was Margaret Caleb was watching, and Margaret's face had done something complicated. She had leaned in when he lifted the rabbit, expecting a fumble, expecting a hesitation, expecting the tell, and instead, she'd gotten a widower holding up his motherless daughter's stuffed animal, like it was the most precious object in the terminal, and there had been no hesitation in it at all, because there was nothing to fake. That part was bone true, and Margaret, who had built her whole cold life on knowing the difference, could not find the seam. "And Sophia," Margaret said, carefully testing, probing, "she's a part of Emma's life. Your daughter knows her." Now that was the trap, because the honest answer was no. Sophia had never met. Emma would never meet Emma, was a stranger who'd grabbed his arm 40 minutes ago, and if he said yes, he was building a lie so specific, it could be checked, so detailed, it could collapse. Caleb looked at Sophia, and Sophia looked back at him, stricken, helpless, her eyes begging him. She didn't know what for to save it, to end it, to do whatever a person does when the ground opens under them in front of the one soul they'd lie to God himself to protect. "I'm going to answer that one honestly too," Caleb said, slowly turning back to Margaret, "because I think you'll respect it more than a pretty story." He set the rabbit down. Emma lost her mother 3 years ago. She was 4. She barely remembers her, and what she does remember, she's terrified of losing. So when it comes to letting a new woman into that little girl's heart, I don't rush. I don't force it. I've been careful, maybe too careful. Sophia has been patient with me about that, more patient than I had any right to expect. He held Margaret's gaze. Blending a family after a loss like that isn't a thing you do fast. It's a thing you do right. And I'd rather your daughter be a little frustrated with how slow I'm going than have my Emma get her heart broken twice before she's 8. So, no ma'am, they're not as close as they'll be someday. But that's not a crack in my marriage. That's me being the kind of father your daughter married me for in the first place. It was, Caleb would think later, the most honest lie he had ever told, because every single word of it was true. He was careful. He would never rush a new woman into Emma's heart. He would rather anyone in the world be frustrated with him than let his daughter grieve twice. He had simply told the truth about who he was and let Margaret assume it applied to a marriage that didn't exist. And there was no crack in it, because there was no fiction in it, only a real man describing his real heart and daring a cold woman to find fault with it. Margaret was silent for a long moment. "You love her," she finally said. It wasn't a question exactly. It was a woman reading a face she had spent an hour trying to catch in a lie. Caleb looked at Sophia, And here at last was the one thing he could not answer with a technicality. Here was the question that had no true answer escape hatch, because he had known this woman for less than an hour, and love was not a thing you built in less than an hour, and to say yes was to lie outright cleanly, with no truth hiding underneath it. He looked at Sophia Bennett, at the tear tracks on her face, at the way she was still kneeling by her grandmother's chair, at the woman who ran a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars and had grabbed a stranger's arm because she could not bear to break an old woman's heart, at the person who had lied for 2 years out of nothing but love, and had finally been caught out by that love, and had chosen in her panic the one man in a terminal full of strangers who would kneel down and lie beautifully to protect the thing she was protecting. And Caleb Walker discovered that he did not have to lie at all. "I know what it's like," he said quietly, still looking at Sophia, "to think your best days are behind you, to think the door's closed, to decide that surviving is the most you get to ask for." His throat worked. "And then somebody grabs your arm when you're not looking and reminds you that your heart's still working, that you're still capable of being something more than just getting through the day." He didn't break the look. "I didn't expect her, Margaret. I'd stopped expecting anybody, but she reminded me I was still alive in a place I thought was dead." He finally turned back to Margaret, and his voice was rock steady. "So yes, ma'am, I love your daughter. And I'll tell you the God's honest truth, it surprised me more than it'll ever surprise you." The terminal roared on around them, the boarding calls, the rolling suitcases, the 100 strangers who had no idea that a small holy thing was happening in a bank of plastic chairs near gate B14. And Sophia Bennett stared at the man she'd grabbed by the wrist 40 minutes ago. And she understood with a lurch that stole her breath that he had just told the truth. Every word. He'd said it to a lie, but he'd meant it for real. And the terrible, wonderful, impossible thing was that she'd felt it land, felt it match something in her own chest, that she'd kept starved and locked away for so many years, she'd forgotten it was there. Eleanor was weeping again, openly and unashamed. "Oh, my heart," she kept saying. "Oh, my heart, my heart." And Margaret Bennett looked at Caleb Walker for a long, long moment, and then she did something that made Sophia's stomach drop through the floor. She smiled, a real one, small, reluctant, but real. "I've been trying to catch you in a lie for the last hour," Margaret said. "Do you know that—" "I know that, ma'am," Caleb said. "You weren't subtle." Margaret let out a short, startled laugh, the first genuine sound she'd made since she walked over. "No, I don't suppose I was." She studied him. "I've watched every man who's ever come near my daughter, and I've watched all of them show me exactly who they were the second they thought I couldn't see. And you know what I kept waiting for, Caleb? I kept waiting for you to flinch, to dodge, to hand me some polished little answer designed to make me like you." She shook her head slowly. "And you never did it once. Every hard question I threw at you, you answered by telling me something true about yourself and letting the chips fall. That's not what liars do. Liars perform. You just sat there and told me the truth, over and over." Sophia felt sick. Because Margaret was right, and Margaret was also completely wrong. And the fact that she was right about the man while being wrong about the marriage was the most dangerous thing that could possibly be happening, because it meant Margaret was about to lower her guard for exactly the wrong reason. "Mom," Sophia started. "You don't have to. Let me finish, Sophia." Margaret held up a hand, and her eyes stayed on Caleb. "I owe this man an apology, and I don't apologize often, so let me get it out before I lose the nerve." She drew a breath. "Caleb, I came over here ready to tear you apart. I decided before I ever met you that you weren't good enough for her, because I decided that about all of them, because—" Her composure flickered just for an instant. "Because when Sophia was 7 years old, I chose my own life over hers, and I have spent every day since then terrified that she'd end up with someone who'd do to her what I did. Choose themselves. Leave when it got hard." Her voice caught. "And I've been so busy watching for that man that I think I made it impossible for any good one to ever get through. So, if you're the man you've shown me, you are in the last hour, and God help me, I think you might be." Then I'm sorry. For the interrogation, and for a great many things that aren't your business, but that my daughter knows about very well. Sophia was frozen. In 32 years, she had never once heard her mother say the word sorry and mean it. Ma'am, Caleb said gently, there's nothing to apologize for. You were doing exactly what you should have been doing. You were protecting her. He glanced at Sophia. A mother who grills the man her daughter married until she's sure he's real, that's not a cold woman. That's a woman who loves hard and got burned once and swore it'd never happen to her girl again. He looked back at Margaret. I know a little something about protecting people you can't stand to lose. It doesn't always look gentle from the outside, but I recognize it, and I respect the hell out of it. Margaret's eyes went bright, and she looked away quickly and pretended to search for something in her handbag, and everyone at that little cluster of chairs had the grace to pretend they hadn't seen the cold, sharp mother of Sophia Bennett blink back tears in the middle of an airport. Well, Margaret said, her voice unsteady. Well, Margaret, Eleanor said, reaching out to take her daughter-in-law's hand. Sit down before you fall down. Both of you. Sit. We have how long, Sophie Bug? How long before they take me? Sophia looked at the departures board at the clock, and her heart clenched because the 40 minutes were nearly gone. 15 minutes, Grandma. Maybe less. They'll come for your chair soon. Then don't waste them. Eleanor gripped Sophia's hand with one of hers, and Caleb's with the other, drawing them close on either side of her wheelchair, and she looked back and forth between them, with a face so full of contentment it hurt to look at. I want to hear about the wedding. I know you told me on the phone, Sophie Bug, but I want to hear it again, and I want to hear it from him. Caleb, tell an old woman about the day you married my granddaughter. And Caleb Walker, who had built exactly one wedding cover story in the last 40 minutes and abandoned half of it, already felt the ground tilt one more time, because this was different from the anniversary question. He couldn't dodge a wedding by talking philosophically about what mattered. Eleanor didn't want philosophy. She wanted the day. She wanted the details a grandmother collects and treasures: the light, the flowers, the vows, the moment. She wanted to be given a memory she could carry back to Boston and hold on to in the nights she had left. He felt Sophia's panic beside him, silent and total, and Caleb realized in that suspended second that he had a choice, and that it was the same choice he'd had 40 minutes ago when a stranger grabbed his arm, and it was the same choice he'd had 3 years ago, in a small room with a chaplain. The choice that came down always to the same question. Who am I when it's hard? He could give her a thin, careful story and hope it held. Or he could do the thing he'd been doing all along. The only thing that had worked, the only thing that was true. He could stop performing and speak from the one place in him that had never lied about anything. Ma'am, Caleb said softly, can I tell you something instead of the wedding? Eleanor's brow furrowed. Something instead. The wedding was a good day, but you know what a wedding is better than I do. You've been to 100 of them. Flowers and a cake and everybody dressed up. I could tell you about all that, and you'd smile and you'd forget it by the time you landed in Boston. Caleb turned Eleanor's frail hand over in his. But there's a different day I'd rather give you, because it's the one that tells you who I really am to your granddaughter. And I think that's what you actually crossed the whole country to find out. Not what our wedding looked like, but whether she's safe with me. Eleanor went very still. Even Margaret leaned in. Tell me that day then, the old woman whispered. And Caleb did. He told her about a night, and he built it as he spoke, but he built it out of true bricks, out of nights he'd actually lived just wearing Sophia's name, a night when Sophia had come home from work, broken down and defeated. Sure she'd failed. Sure everyone was about to find out she was a fraud. He told her how he'd found her sitting on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. because she couldn't make it as far as the bed. He described sitting down on that cold floor beside her, not saying anything, not trying to fix it, just being there because he'd learned a long time ago that when a person is drowning, you don't lecture them about swimming. You just get in the water so they're not alone in it. He told Eleanor how he'd stayed on that floor until the sun came up, and how in the morning Sophia had looked at him and said she didn't know how to be loved by someone who stayed because everyone in her whole life had eventually left, and he'd told her. "I told her," Caleb said, and his voice had gone rough and low and utterly steady, "that I wasn't going anywhere, that she could test it as long as she needed to, that she could push and I'd still be there, that the whole point of me was that I stay." He looked at Sophia, and Sophia was weeping now silently, and he did not look away from her. "Because I know what it does to a person to lose the one who stayed. My Emma knows, and I swore on everything I've got that your granddaughter would never wonder, not for one single day, whether the man beside her was going to be there in the morning." He turned back to Eleanor. "That's the day I'd give you, ma'am. Not the wedding. That one. Because that's the day she found out she was safe. And I think that's the day you flew across the country to make sure was real." Nobody spoke. Eleanor Bennett was crying without any sound at all, the tears simply falling. And she brought Caleb's rough hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles, and she said in a voice gone paper thin, "It's real. I can feel that it's real. Oh, thank God. Thank God. Thank God. It's real." And it was real. That was the thing that made Sophia's chest cave in, because Caleb Walker had just described in perfect and devastating detail exactly the kind of man he was, and exactly the kind of loving she had never once received in her entire life. And he'd handed it to her grandmother as a gift, and the grandmother had believed it because it was true. It was all true. It was just true about a marriage that didn't exist yet. Yet. The word landed in Sophia's mind before she could stop it, and it terrified her, and she couldn't make it leave. "Sophie Bug," Eleanor said, reaching for her, and Sophia took her grandmother's hand and pressed it to her own wet cheek. "Do you hear this man? Do you hear what you have?" "I hear him, Grandma," Sophia whispered. "I hear him. Don't you ever let him go. Do you understand me? I don't care what happens. I don't care what fights you have. A man who'll sit on the floor with you at 2 in the morning and not say a word and just stay, that is the whole thing, Sophie Bug. That is the entire thing. Everything else is decoration." Eleanor's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Your grandfather sat on the floor with me. The night we lost our first baby. He sat on the bathroom floor with me for 11 hours, and he never said one wrong word, he just held on. And I knew then that I could survive anything as long as that man was in the world. And when he died," her voice broke. "When he died, the thing I missed wasn't the big moments. It was knowing somebody would sit on the floor with me. That's what marriage is. That's the only thing it is." She looked at Caleb with fierce, streaming eyes. "You know that. You already know that. How do you already know that so young?" And Caleb Walker, who knew it because he had sat on that floor himself, not with Sophia, but with grief alone for 3 years, looked at the old woman and said the truest thing he'd said all day. "Because I lost somebody too, ma'am, and I learned it the hard way. And I decided I'd never let anybody I love find out what that floor feels like when there's nobody sitting on it with them." Eleanor nodded and could not speak, and simply held on to both their hands and wept with a joy so complete and so total that Margaret finally had to turn away and press her fingers to her own eyes. And then a voice brisk and kind and utterly oblivious cut through the holy little silence. "Mrs. Bennett." An airline attendant had appeared behind the wheelchair checking a tablet. "We're going to get you over to gate B22 for your connection to Boston. We've got plenty of time, but I want to get you settled and comfortable before we start boarding. You ready, hon?" And just like that, the 40 minutes were over. Sophia felt it hit her like a physical blow, the ending the deadline the moment she'd been racing toward and dreading all at once. In a minute, this attendant would wheel Eleanor away toward a different gate, and the fiction would end, and Caleb would pick up his backpack and his daughter's crooked-eared rabbit and walk to his own flight, and she would never see him again, and her grandmother would fly back to Boston, believing her Sophie Bug was safe and loved, and married to a man who sat on floors at 2 in the morning. The lie would hold. It had worked. Everything she'd wanted had happened. So why did she feel like she was about to lose the most important thing she'd ever almost had? "Grandma?" Sophia said, and her voice broke on the word, "Grandma, they have to take you now." "I know, Sophie Bug." Eleanor cupped her granddaughter's face one more time, memorizing it. "I know. Don't cry. Look at you all grown up, running your big company, married to a good man. Look what you made of yourself. Look what you are." She kissed Sophia's forehead. "I can go home happy now. Do you understand me? Whatever happens next, I can go home happy. You gave me the only thing I ever wanted. You let me see you loved before I go." "Don't say before you go, Grandma." "Hush. I'm 81, not a fool. Let an old woman say her true things while she's got the chance." Eleanor turned to Caleb then, and she gripped his hand one final time, and she looked up into the face of the stranger she believed was family, and she said, "Caleb David Walker, come here, come close." Caleb leaned down, and Eleanor Bennett reached into the handbag on her lap, and her hand trembled as it searched, and after a moment she drew out something small, and she pressed it into Caleb's palm, and folded his fingers over it with both of her frail hands. "That belonged to my husband," she whispered. Caleb opened his hand. It was a medal. Old, tarnished, its ribbon frayed at the edges, a navy medal worn smooth by decades of an old woman's thumb rubbing over it. "He was a sailor, too," Eleanor said. 50 years I carried that in my purse after he passed, everywhere I went. Because he told me once, he said, 'Eleanor, a good man never proves himself by what he owns. He proves himself by who he protects.'" Her eyes searched Caleb's face. "I've watched you for 40 minutes, young man, and I have never in my life been so sure of anything. You are the second good man I have ever known. And I would like the medal to go to the second one now, because I won't be carrying it much longer, and I can't stand the thought of it sitting in a drawer when it could be with a man who understands what it means." She closed his fingers over it again. "You protect them, my Sophie Bug, your Emma. You keep sitting on those floors. Will you promise me? Will you promise a dying old woman?" And Caleb Walker, who had walked into that terminal, a stranger who had lied for 40 minutes, who was holding in his rough-scarred hand the 50-year treasured medal of a dead sailor he'd never met, pressed there by a woman who had no idea he was not who she thought. Caleb Walker felt the whole weight of it come down on him at once. The lie and the truth all tangled together, past any hope of separating, and he found that his eyes were burning, and his throat had closed, and he could barely get the words out. But he got them out, and he meant every one. "I promise," he said. "I swear it on my life, ma'am. I'll protect them, both of them. I won't ever stop." And it was not until much later, replaying it in the dark, that Caleb would understand he had just made that vow about a woman he'd known for less than an hour and had meant it more than almost anything he'd ever said. Eleanor smiled radiant and complete and released his hand. "Then I can go," she said softly. "Take me to my gate, dear," she told the attendant. "I'm ready now. I'm finally ready." The attendant released the brake on the wheelchair, and as she began to turn the chair, as Eleanor lifted one frail hand in a wave and called out, "Goodbye, my darlings, goodbye. I love you both so much." Margaret Bennett stepped forward suddenly and caught Caleb's sleeve. She leaned in close so only he could hear, and her voice was low and strange and utterly unlike the cold woman who'd walked over with a coffee cup an hour ago. "Whatever this is," Margaret murmured, her eyes fixed on his. "And I still don't entirely know what it is. You just gave that woman the happiest hour of the last 10 years of her life. And I saw my daughter's face while you talked." She swallowed. "I have not seen that look on Sophia's face since she was 7 years old. Since before I broke something in her that I've never been able to fix." Her fingers tightened on his sleeve. "So, I don't know who you are, Caleb Walker, but I know what I watched, and I am asking you not as her interrogator, but as her mother. Do not disappear on her. Please. Whatever's really going on here, do not be one more person who leaves." And before Caleb could answer, before he could even fully understand what she was saying, Margaret let go of his sleeve, straightened, fixed her face back into its composed mask, and turned to follow the wheelchair down the concourse, leaving Caleb Walker standing there, a dead sailor's medal in one hand and a little girl's stuffed rabbit in the other staring after them, while beside him, Sophia Bennett watched her grandmother roll away toward Boston and pressed both hands over her mouth to keep from breaking apart completely. They stood there long after the wheelchair disappeared around the bend of the concourse, neither of them moving, neither of them speaking, two strangers who had just lived a whole marriage in 40 minutes and now had no idea what to do with their hands. It was Sophia who broke first. "You can go," she said. Her voice came out thin and wrecked. "Your flight. You'll miss your flight. You've done, Caleb, you've done more than I had any right to ask. You should go." Caleb didn't move. He was looking down at the medal in his palm, turning it over slowly, running his thumb along the frayed edge of the ribbon, the way he understood now an old woman had done for 50 years. "She gave me his medal," he said quietly. "I know. Sophia, she gave me her dead husband's Navy medal. She carried this in her purse for 50 years, and she just—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "I can't keep this. This isn't mine. This belongs to your family. I'll give it back to you, and someday you find a way to get it to—" "She gave it to you." Sophia's voice cracked. "Not to me. To you. You saw her face. If you try to give that back, you'll break her heart worse than the truth ever could." She wiped at her cheeks with the heel of her hand, hard angry at her own tears. God, what did I do? What did I do to you? I grabbed a total stranger, and I made you. I made you kneel down and lie to a dying woman and take her most precious thing. And now you're standing here holding it like it's radioactive, because you're too good a man to want it, and it's my fault. It's all my. Stop. Caleb said it softly, but it stopped her. Stop that. I ruined your whole evening. I probably made you miss your flight to your own daughter. And for what? So I wouldn't have to face what I did. You didn't ruin anything. He closed his hand around the medal and finally looked up at her. Sophia, look at me. You want to know what you actually did tonight? She shook her head, not trusting herself. You gave an 81-year-old woman with a bad heart the happiest hour of the last 10 years of her life. Your mother said that. I heard her. Caleb's voice was steady and low. That's not a thing you should be apologizing for. That's a thing most people go their whole lives without ever managing to do for anybody. It was a lie. It was a kindness, Caleb said, wearing a lie's clothes, and I've seen enough of both to know the difference. He glanced down the empty concourse where the wheelchair had gone. That woman is going to fly home to Boston tonight and sleep better than she's slept in years. Whatever happens to her heart whenever her time comes, she's going to go believing the girl she raised isn't alone in the world. You gave her that. I just helped carry it the last 40 minutes. He looked back at Sophia. Don't you dare stand here and call that a thing you did to me. It's one of the better things I've been part of in 3 years. Sophia stared at him, and her face crumpled, and she pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth again, and for a moment she couldn't speak at all. Why are you being so kind about this? She finally managed. I used you. Strangers don't. People don't just, why aren't you angry? You want me to be angry. I want to understand you. Her eyes searched his face desperately, like she was reading a language she'd never seen. I have spent my whole life around people, Caleb. Investors, executives, boards, lawyers. I can read a room in 4 seconds. I can tell you what a person wants before they know they want it. It's how I built everything I have. Her voice shook. And I have been standing next to you for the better part of an hour, and I cannot for the life of me figure out your angle. Because everybody has an angle. Everybody wants something. And I keep waiting for yours, and it's not there, and it's making me insane. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's the saddest thing you've said all night, he said gently. What? That you've been around people your whole life, and you've never once met one who didn't have an angle. He shook his head slowly. Sophia, not everybody's running a play. Some people just help. My daddy was like that. He'd stop on the side of the highway in the rain for a stranger with a flat and never think twice, and my mama used to get so mad she'd say, Frank, one of these days somebody's going to take advantage of you, and he'd say, Ruth, if I stop being the kind of man who helps just because somebody might take advantage, then they already have. He looked at her. I've tried to be my father's son. That's the whole angle. That's it. There's nothing under it. Sophia looked at him like he was something she didn't quite believe was real. People like that don't exist, she said quietly. I stopped believing they existed a long time ago. Well, Caleb almost smiled. One of them just spent 40 minutes being your husband. So, and Sophia let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob, and she pressed her hand over her eyes and her shoulders shook, and Caleb, not knowing what else to do, doing the only thing he knew how to do when somebody was coming apart in front of him, stepped forward and put a steadying hand on her shoulder, the way he would have for anyone, the way he'd been raised to. But it wasn't like it was for anyone. They both felt it. The contact went through both of them like current, and Sophia went still under his hand, and Caleb felt his own breath catch, and for a long, strange moment, neither of them moved, and the terminal roared on around them, oblivious. Sophia lowered her hand from her eyes. I don't even know you, she whispered. No, Caleb agreed. You don't. You don't know me. No. So why does this feel like... She stopped, shook her head. Never mind. Forget it. I'm exhausted, and I'm emotional, and I've been running on adrenaline for an hour. I don't know what I'm saying. You know exactly what you're saying, Caleb said. You're just scared to say it. That's different. She looked up at him sharply. I've been scared to say things my whole life too. He went on, and his hand was still on her shoulder, and neither of them had moved to change that. I've gotten good at recognizing the look. You've got it right now. He let his hand fall finally gently. You feel like something happened here tonight that shouldn't have been able to happen this fast, and it's got you off balance because you're a woman who runs everything, and you can't run this, and it scares you. He picked up his backpack from the floor, slung it over one shoulder, tucked the crooked-eared rabbit into the crook of his arm. For what it's worth, it scares me too. I stopped expecting things to happen to me a long time ago. I was real comfortable with that. And then a woman grabbed my arm at an airport, and now I'm standing here holding a dead man's medal, feeling something I swore I was done feeling, and I've got no idea what to do with it either. The honesty of it landed between them plain and unadorned, and Sophia stared at him with her heart hammering in her throat. So, what do we do? She said. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he glanced up at the departures board, and something in his expression shifted, and he almost laughed. Well, for starters, he said, I already missed my flight. What? Boarding closed 6 minutes ago, while I was standing here telling your grandmother about sitting on kitchen floors. He shook his head rueful. That was the last flight out tonight. I'm not getting home till tomorrow. Oh my God. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Caleb, your daughter Emma, she's expecting you. She's with my neighbor. Good woman watches Emma when I travel. It's fine. He was already pulling out his phone. I'll call and let them know. Emma'll be disappointed, but she's tough. She gets it. Kid's been through worse than a delayed daddy. He started to dial, then paused, and looked at Sophia, and something almost wry crossed his tired face. Don't do that. Don't stand there looking like you just ran over my dog. It's a missed flight. I've survived worse Tuesdays. Let me pay for a hotel. At least let me... Caleb, you missed your flight to your child because of my mess. The least I can do is... I'm not taking your money, Sophia. It's not charity. I'm not taking your money. He said it kindly, but there was iron under it, the same iron she'd heard when he refused to answer to a dead man's name. I've got a little put by. I'll get a room by the airport, catch the first flight out in the morning, be home to hug my kid by lunch. It's fine. And I'd appreciate it if you'd stop trying to buy your way out of feeling guilty because it's not going to work, and it's a little insulting to both of us. That stopped her cold. She blinked. You're very direct, she said. 12 years in the Navy and 3 years alone with a 7-year-old. You run out of patience for anything that isn't the truth. He put the phone to his ear. Give me 1 second. Hey, Diane. Yeah, it's Caleb. Listen, I missed my flight. I'm stuck in Seattle till morning. Can Emma? Yeah. Would you? Thank you. Thank you. Diane, I owe you. A pause, and then his whole face changed, softened, opened up into something Sophia hadn't seen on him yet. Hey, baby girl. Yeah, it's Daddy. No, I'm okay, I promise. I just missed my airplane, that's all. Silly Daddy, right? No, I'll be home tomorrow. Tomorrow, I promise. Yeah. Is Mr. Rabbit taking good care of me? He sure is. He's right here. Caleb glanced down at the stuffed animal in his arm, and his voice went thick. He misses you too, baby. We both do. Okay, I love you to the moon. To the moon, and that's right. Night-night. Be good for Miss Diane. He hung up, and Sophia was staring at him with a look he couldn't read. What? He said. Nothing. She shook her head quickly. It's just nothing. But it wasn't nothing, and they both knew it. She had just watched a man who'd spent the last hour holding it together through the hardest kind of pressure absolutely dissolve into tenderness at the sound of a 7-year-old's voice. And something about it had reached into Sophia Bennett's chest and squeezed. To the moon, she said quietly. That's what you say to her. To the moon and back. Her mama started it. Caleb's throat worked. First thing Emma ever memorized, before she could even really talk, she'd hold up her little hand and try to say it. So. He cleared his throat. It stuck. Sophia had to look away. I never had that, she said before she could stop herself. Had what? Somebody who... She stopped, gathered herself, tried to make it lighter than it was, and failed. My mother wasn't a to-the-moon kind of mother. She was a here's-your-schedule kind of mother, when she was around at all. And my father just... She waved a hand vaguely. Eleanor loved me like that, my grandmother. She was my to-the-moon, but she was in Boston and I was here, and anyway, it's fine. It was a long time ago. I turned out fine. Did you? Caleb said. It wasn't unkind, but it wasn't quite a question either. Sophia looked at him. You built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, he said quietly. And you spent tonight grabbing strangers in an airport because the only person who ever loved you like that is dying, and you'd rather lie to God than let her worry about you for 1 second. He held her gaze. I don't know that I'd call that fine, Sophia. I'd call that a woman who's been carrying something heavy by herself for a real long time. The terminal noise seemed very far away all of a sudden. Sophia's eyes filled, and this time she didn't fight it, and she didn't look away either. Nobody's ever said that to me, she whispered. Nobody's ever. Everybody just sees the company, the success. They see what I built, and they think that means I'm okay. Even Eleanor thinks I'm okay. Now that's the whole point. That's why I lied, so she could think... Her voice broke completely. You're the first person in years who looked at me and saw that I'm not okay, and I've known you for an hour. How did you do that? Because I know what it looks like, Caleb said simply. I see it in the mirror every morning. And that undid her. She turned away. One hand pressed hard over her mouth, her shoulders shaking, and Caleb stood there and let her cry because he'd learned on a kitchen floor 3 years ago that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for a drowning person is just not leave. He didn't reach for her. He didn't tell her it was okay. He just stood close, solid and quiet, so that whenever she was ready to turn back around, he'd still be there. And when she finally did turn back around, wiping her face, laughing a little at herself in that embarrassed way people do after they've cracked open in front of a stranger, Caleb said gently, You hungry? Sophia blinked. What? It's almost 8 o'clock. You've been running on nothing but fear and adrenaline for over an hour, and I missed my flight, so I've got nowhere to be till morning, and there's a whole terminal full of overpriced airport food out there. He shrugged. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm saying I could eat, and you look like you're about to fall over, and neither one of us wants to be alone right now, even though neither one of us is going to admit it. So, you hungry? Sophia looked at him for a long moment. There's a wine bar, she said slowly. Past security. On the other side. It's the food's actually not terrible. I don't drink, Caleb said. But I'll watch you have a glass. You've earned it. You don't drink. Not for 3 years. He didn't explain, and she didn't ask, and something in the way he said it told her not to. But I make excellent company for somebody who does. I'm told I'm a very good listener, mostly because I don't talk much. And Sophia Bennett, CEO, widowmaker of boardrooms. A woman who negotiated 9-figure deals without blinking surprised herself completely by laughing a real laugh, the first one all night that didn't have tears underneath it. Okay, she said. Okay, 1 glass of wine. And you have to eat something too. I'm not sitting there eating alone while a Navy veteran watches me like I'm a documentary. Deal. They walked. And it should have been strange, 2 people who'd met an hour ago, walking through an airport together, like they had somewhere to be, but somehow it wasn't. Somehow it felt, Sophia thought, and immediately hated herself for thinking it easy. It felt easy in a way that nothing in her life felt easy. Everything she did was strategy. Everything was a move. And this was just walking. Next to a man who wasn't trying to get anything from her. Can I ask you something? She said as they walked. You can ask. I might not answer. When my mother asked you if you loved me, Sophia kept her eyes forward on the concourse ahead of them because she couldn't ask it while looking at him. Back there, in front of Eleanor. And you said all that about how somebody grabs your arm when you're not looking and reminds you your heart's still working. She swallowed. Was that I know it was for the story. I know you had to say something. But the way you said it, you want to know if I meant it. I want to know if you were that good an actor, Sophia said, or if... She couldn't finish. Caleb walked a few more steps in silence. I told you back there, he said finally, that I don't lie for people I don't trust. You remember that? I remember. Well, here's the other half of that. He stopped walking, and she stopped too, and he turned to face her in the middle of the concourse, while travelers streamed around them on both sides. I'm not a good enough actor to fake the thing your mother saw. I've got exactly one skill when it comes to talking to people, and it's this I can't perform. I never could. My wife used to say it was my worst quality and my best one. When I say a thing, it's because I mean it, or it's because it's true, and usually both. And if it's neither, I can't get it out of my mouth right, and everybody can tell. He held her gaze. So no, I wasn't acting. I said your heart reminds a man his own still works, and I meant it. God help me about a woman I've known for 1 hour, which is insane, and I know it's insane, and I said it anyway because you asked me a straight question, and I told you I don't lie to people I trust. His jaw tightened. And somewhere in the last hour, I started trusting you, which is also insane. So there's your answer. Take it or leave it. Sophia stood absolutely still in the middle of the concourse. That's the most terrifying thing anyone's ever said to me, she whispered. Yeah. Caleb let out a breath. Tell me about it. And then, because the moment was too big and too fast and too much for either of them to hold, Sophia did what she always did when something threatened to overwhelm her. She reached for the practical, the manageable, the thing she could control. We should the wine bars this way, she said a little breathless. Come on, before I say something I can't take back. Sophia, please, just food first. I can't do the big terrifying thing on an empty stomach. Let me have a glass of wine and a plate of overpriced cheese and pretend to be a normal person for 30 minutes, and then maybe, I can figure out what any of this is. She looked at him almost pleadingly. Is that okay? Can we just be 2 people having dinner for a little while, before we figure out whatever this is? Caleb looked at her, and something in his weathered face softened all the way through. Yeah, he said. We can be 2 people having dinner. He fell into step beside her. I'm real good at that one, actually, being just 2 people. It's the rest of it I'm rusty on. They found the wine bar tucked into a quieter corner of the terminal, and they took a small table in the back, and Sophia ordered a glass of red, and Caleb ordered a coffee, and they both ordered food. They were too wrung out to really eat, and for a little while, a strange suspended golden. Little while they did exactly what she'd asked. They were just two people having dinner. She told him about the company. Not the pitch, not the numbers. He stopped her the second she started reaching for the numbers, said, "I don't care what it's worth, I care what it does." And so she told him what it did. She told him about the hospital in Ohio that had called her personally because their software had caught a patient who'd been about to fall through the cracks, an old man with no family, who would have died alone in a hallway if a nurse's screen hadn't lit up in time. She told him she kept the voicemail from that hospital and listened to it on the bad nights. And Caleb told her about Emma. He told her about the braiding videos and the burnt pancakes and the school play where Emma had been cast as tree number 3 and had thrown herself into it like it was Broadway. He told her about the nights that were hard, the nights Emma woke up asking for a mother she barely remembered, and how he'd hold her and not know what to say, because there was nothing to say, there was only staying. "That's the floor," Sophia said quietly. "The thing you told my grandmother about, sitting on the floor. You do that with Emma." "I do that with Emma." Caleb turned his coffee cup slowly. "I didn't have to make that part up. That's just the job. You stay. You sit on the floor. You don't leave." He looked up at her. "I meant what I told her is what I'm saying. I just changed whose floor it was." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "I want to know what her floor felt like," she said. "Your wife's. The night she—" She stopped. "I'm sorry. That's too much. Forget I asked." "No." Caleb shook his head slowly. "No, it's nobody asks. That's the thing nobody understands. Everybody's so scared to ask about her that it's like she never existed. They think they're being kind, not bringing her up. But it just makes her disappear a little more every year, and I hate it. I hate it." His voice roughened. "So no. Ask. Ask me about her. It's the only way she stays real." And so Sophia asked, and Caleb told her about a woman named Sarah, about a laugh about the way she'd corrected his coffee order too, the very first time they met, which was why he'd built the cover story around a coffee shop, because it was the truest thing he had. He told her about the grocery store and the phone call that morning, about Emma's first tooth and the chaplain and the small room. He told her things he had told no one in 3 years, and Sophia listened the way he'd taught her to listen. Without knowing he was teaching her, she just stayed. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't offer the 8-second sympathy. She just sat across the little table and stayed in the water with him and let Sarah be real for a while. And when he finally stopped talking and the wine bar had gone quiet around them and both their plates sat mostly untouched, Sophia reached across the table and put her hand over his. "Thank you," she said, "for letting her be real. For me." Caleb looked down at her hand on his. "Thank you for asking," he said. "You have no idea." And they sat there, her hand over his. Neither of them pulling away two broken people who had found in the most impossible place in the most impossible way someone who understood the exact shape of the other's scars, and both of them knowing without saying it that whatever had grabbed hold of them in that terminal was not going to let go when the sun came up. "I have to ask you something," Sophia said finally, very quietly. "And I need you to be as honest as you've been all night, even if it's the terrifying answer. Okay?" She took a breath. "When you fly home tomorrow," she said, "when you hug Emma and go back to your life, is this just going to be a story? The night a crazy woman grabbed your arm at an airport? Something you tell people at parties someday?" Her voice wavered. "Or is there a version of tomorrow where you don't just disappear?" Caleb turned his hand over under hers so their palms met, and he closed his rough scarred fingers around her soft ones, and he looked at her across that little table in that quiet airport wine bar, and Sophia held her breath. "My mama's been gone 12 years, he said, "and there's one thing she told me I never forgot. She said, Caleb, when life hands you something real, you don't get to pretend you didn't notice just because the timing's inconvenient, or it scares you, or it doesn't look the way you thought it would. Real is rare. When it shows up, you say thank you and you hold on." His thumb moved slowly over the back of her hand. "I don't know what this is yet. I'm not going to stand here and tell you I love you because I've known you for 2 hours, and I've got too much respect for the real thing to throw the word around. But I know it's not nothing. I've been numb for 3 years, Sophia. 3 years. And tonight for the first time I'm not. He tightened his grip on her hand. So, no. I'm not going to disappear. Not unless you tell me to. If you want me gone tomorrow, I'll go and I'll never bother you again, and I'll wish you every good thing. But if you don't... He held her gaze. Then I'd like to find out what this is. Slow, careful, the way I do everything. But I'd like to find out. Sophia Bennett, who had never in her life let herself want something she couldn't control, who had built an empire precisely, so she'd never have to depend on another human being staying, looked at the widower holding her hand and felt the whole architecture of her carefully defended heart begin to give way, and made the most reckless, terrifying, uncontrollable decision of her entire life. "Don't disappear," she whispered. "Please, don't be one more person who leaves." And it was the exact thing her mother had said to Caleb an hour ago, word for word, though Sophia had no way of knowing that, and Caleb felt the coincidence land in his chest like something almost holy, a mother and a daughter an hour apart, both asking the same broken thing of the same stranger. "I won't," Caleb said, and he meant it more than almost anything he'd ever said. He flew home the next morning, and he called her that night, and that was how it started. Not with a grand gesture, not with a sweeping romance, but with a phone call, the way real things usually start, quiet and unremarkable and easy to miss if you're not paying attention. "How was the flight?" Sophia said the second she picked up. "You're checking on me." "I'm not checking on you. I'm making conversation." "You're checking on me. It's..." Caleb glanced at the clock. "You called me back within 4 seconds. You had the phone in your hand." "I did not have the phone in my hand." "Sophia." A pause. "I had the phone in my hand," she admitted, and he could hear the reluctant smile in it, and something in his chest warmed all the way through. They talked for 2 hours that first night, and 3 the next. And somewhere in the second week, Sophia stopped pretending the calls were about anything other than what they were, stopped opening with business-like little excuses, and just said, when he picked up, "Tell me about your day," in a voice so soft and unguarded that Caleb had to sit down the first time he heard it, because it was the voice of a woman who had never once in her life gotten to ask that question of somebody who'd actually answer. He told her about his days, the job sites, the long drives, Emma's spelling tests, and her fierce ongoing war with a girl named Madison who had said Emma's shoes were babyish. Sophia took the shoe war very seriously, which delighted Emma to no end, when Caleb, carefully, gently testing the water, mentioned that a friend of his had strong opinions about Madison. "You told her about me," Sophia said. "I told her I had a friend who thought Madison sounded like trouble. That's all. I didn't, Sophia. I'm being careful. I told you I'd be careful." I know you are." A pause. What did she say? She said, and I'm quoting directly, "Your friend sounds smart. Does she know Madison is also mean at recess?" Caleb could hear Sophia laughing on the other end, that real laugh, the one without tears under it. "So, you've got a 7-year-old ally in the Madison situation is what I'm telling you." "Tell her Madison peaks in 3rd grade, Sophia said. "Tell her I said that. The mean ones always peak early." "I'm not going to tell a 7-year-old that her enemy peaks in 3rd grade. "Why not?" "It's true. It's practically a law of nature." "Because then she'll say it to Madison, and I'll get a call from her teacher, and I'll have to explain that my..." He stopped. The silence on the line stretched. "That you're what?" Sophia said quietly. "I don't know what to call you yet," Caleb admitted. "That's the honest answer. I don't have a word for you. Friend's not right. It stopped being right about 10 days ago. But the other words feel too big to say over a phone, and I told you I wouldn't throw the big words around until I meant them all the way down." He let out a breath. "So, I've just been avoiding the noun entirely. You may have noticed." "I noticed." Her voice had gone thick. "I've been doing the same thing." "Have you? I told my assistant you were a business contact last week. She asked who I kept taking 2-hour calls with, and I said, business contact. And she looked at me like I'd grown a second head, because I do not take 2-hour calls. Caleb, I have people who exist specifically, so I don't have to take long calls. And here I am hiding in my own office with the door shut talking to a... She stopped. To a business contact, in Seattle, who I've met exactly once. Twice, Caleb said. You're forgetting the wine bar. That was the same night. Still counts as twice. She laughed, and then the laugh faded, and something more fragile came into her voice. How's Eleanor? She asked. Obviously you haven't talked to her, that would be, but has she called you? She has your number now. From before. Caleb was quiet for a second. She called me 2 days ago, he said. Sophia sat up. She what? Wednesday morning. I about had a heart attack when the caller ID said Boston. I almost didn't answer. He rubbed the back of his neck. But I couldn't just let it ring. What if something was wrong? So I picked up and it was her and Sophia. His voice softened all the way down. She just wanted to talk to me, that's all. She said she couldn't stop thinking about our conversation at the airport, and she hoped I didn't mind an old woman calling out of the blue, and she wanted to know how Emma was doing in school. He swallowed. She remembered Emma's name. She remembered the shoe war because I mentioned it in passing at the airport. She's 81 years old with a bad heart, and she remembered a detail about a 7-year-old she's never met because she thinks that little girl is her great-grandchild. The line was silent. Oh God, Sophia whispered. Caleb, what did you do? I talked to her. He said it simply. What was I going to do, hang up on her? She's the sweetest woman I've ever. I talked to her, Sophia. For 45 minutes. She told me about her garden. She told me about your grandfather, more stories about him the sailor. She told me she prays for me and Emma every night now. She's added us to her prayers. His voice broke just slightly. An old woman I lied to is praying for my daughter every night. That's where we are. That's the thing we did. Sophia had her hand pressed over her mouth. He could hear her breathing. I can't keep doing this, she said finally, and her voice was shaking. Caleb, I can't. It's one thing to lie to her once in a terminal to keep her heart from breaking, but now she's calling you. She's praying for Emma. She thinks she's family. Every day this goes on, the lie gets bigger, and the fall gets worse, and I have to tell her the truth, don't I? I have to. This is monstrous. What I'm doing is monstrous. Hey. Caleb's voice went firm and steady, the voice from the airport, the one that had told her to breathe. Slow down. You're spiraling. I'm not spiraling. I'm seeing clearly for the first time in... You're spiraling. I know spiraling. Emma spirals. I spiral. Everybody spirals. It's a human thing, and the only way out is to slow down and take it one true piece at a time. He waited until he heard her breathing steady. Now, you want to tell Eleanor the truth. Okay, let's actually look at that instead of just panicking about it. What happens if you tell her? She finds out her granddaughter is a liar. She finds out the happiest hour of her last 10 years was a fraud. She finds out I was so desperate and so alone that I grabbed a stranger in an airport, and her heart, Caleb, her heart. That's what you're afraid of. The heart. Yes. The word came out broken. The doctor said stress. They said keep her calm, keep her happy, avoid shocks. And you want me to fly to Boston and tell an 81-year-old woman with a failing heart that the one thing that made her happy was a lie I made up to keep her calm, that could kill her, Caleb. Telling her the truth could actually literally kill her. And then I'd have murdered my grandmother with the truth to make myself feel less guilty about a lie I told to protect her in the first place. She was crying now. There's no way out. Don't you see there's no version of this that isn't a catastrophe? I built a trap, and I walked into it, and there's no door. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. There's one door, he said. There's one door, Sophia, and you've been standing in front of it for 2 years, and you've been too scared to see it, and I understand why, because it's the hardest door of all. He took a breath. You make it true. Silence. What? She said. You make it true. Caleb repeated slow and steady. You've been treating this like a lie you have to either maintain forever or confess. But those aren't the only two options. There's a third one. You let it become real. Not tomorrow, not on a schedule. But you stop treating what's happening between us like a problem to manage, and you let it be what it's actually trying to be. And one day, maybe soon, maybe not, it stops being a lie at all. Because I actually am the man in her granddaughter's life, and Emma actually is the little girl she prays for. And it's not a fraud anymore, it's just slow. The way real things are slow. His voice was very gentle now. You didn't tell Eleanor a lie about your future, Sophia. You told her a lie about your present. And the difference between those two things is the only door there is. You make the present catch up to the lie. And then it was never a lie at all. It was just early. Sophia couldn't speak. I'm not saying that to trap you, Caleb said quickly. I'm not saying it to make this move faster than you want, or to make you feel like you owe your grandmother a relationship with me. God, no. If this isn't real, if in a month you decide I'm just a nice man you met on a bad night, then you tell me, and I'll disappear, and you'll figure out Eleanor some other way, and I'll never hold it against you. I mean that. He paused. But if it is real, if these calls are what I think they are, then you don't have to choose between a lie and a catastrophe. You just have to be brave enough to let a real thing be real. And I know that's the hardest thing in the world for you. I've been listening to you for 2 weeks. I know it terrifies you more than any truth could. His voice dropped. But it's the door, Sophia. It's the only one there is. She was crying so hard she couldn't answer for a long time. And when she finally could, she said the thing she'd been most afraid of, the thing under all the other things. What if I'm not somebody a real thing can happen to? She whispered. Caleb, what if I'm broken in a way that everybody leaves me? Everybody. My father left, my mother left in every way that counts, and even Eleanor, the one person who stayed, she's dying. She's leaving too, just slower. And I built the company, and the money, and the whole armor, all of it. So I'd never have to feel that again. So I'd never have to depend on somebody staying. And you're asking me to take the armor off. You're asking me to let it be real, which means letting it be able to hurt me, and I don't know if I know how to do that. I don't know if I'm built for it anymore. Sophia. What? You grabbed a stranger's arm in an airport, Caleb said softly, and asked him to protect the one person you love. You didn't do that from behind armor. You did that with your whole heart hanging out in the open, more exposed than I've ever seen anybody, because you loved her more than you were scared. He let it land. That's not a woman who doesn't know how to let real things happen. That's a woman who does it full out when it matters enough. You've just never once done it for yourself. You've only ever done it for her. His voice went quiet and certain. So maybe the question isn't whether you're built for it. Maybe it's whether you're willing to love yourself even a fraction of how much you love Eleanor. Because if you loved yourself even a little bit like that, you'd have grabbed something good for you a long time ago. The line was silent for a very long time. That's not fair, Sophia finally said, but there was no anger in it, only a kind of wonder. You're not allowed to know me that well after 2 weeks. I told you at the airport. I can't perform and I can't fake it. And the flip side of that is, I see people real clear, because I'm not busy managing an angle. A pause. I see you, Sophia. I've seen you since you grabbed my arm. And I'm not scared of what I see. I know that's the thing you're really afraid of, that if somebody actually saw you all the way they'd leave. And I'm telling you, I've seen it, and I'm still here, and I'm not going anywhere. And that was the night 3 weeks after a stranger grabbed his arm in a terminal that Sophia Bennett finally let herself cry the way she'd needed to cry for 32 years. Big and ugly and unguarded, with a man on the other end of a phone line who did not try to fix it and did not tell her it was okay, and did not leave, who just stayed on the line breathing quietly with her until it passed, sitting on the floor with her the only way he could from 2,000 miles away. Okay, she said when it finally passed. Her voice was wrecked and raw and somehow lighter than it had been in years. Okay. We make it real. Slow. Careful. Your way. But we try. For real. Not for Eleanor. For us. And if it becomes real, then it was never a lie. It was just early. She let out a shaky breath. God, that's terrifying. Yeah, Caleb said, and she could hear him smiling. The real stuff always is. So they tried. And the trying looked like nothing dramatic at all, which was how Caleb had told her the real things always looked. It looked like a plane ticket. 6 weeks later, Sophia flying to Seattle, not for business, telling no assistant it was a business contact arriving at the same airport, where she'd grabbed his arm and standing at the same security gate with her heart in her throat, watching him walk toward her through the crowd with a little girl's hand held tight in his, because Caleb had decided it was time. Carefully, the way he did everything. Emma, he'd said that morning, kneeling down to her level in their little kitchen. You remember my friend, the one who thinks Madison peaks in 3rd grade? The smart one. The smart one. Her name's Sophia, and she's flying all the way here from far away just to meet you. Because she wanted to. He'd watched his daughter's face carefully. Is that okay? You can say if it's not. I won't be mad. This is your house too, and you get a say in who comes to it. Emma had considered this with the enormous gravity of a 7-year-old. Does she like animals? I think she does. Does she know it's not nice to say babyish about somebody's shoes? I think she knows that very well. Emma had nodded, decision made. Okay, she can come, but I get to show her Mr. Rabbit first before anybody else. So at the airport, when Sophia came off the plane and saw them waiting, the tired veteran and the 7-year-old girl clutching a crooked-eared stuffed rabbit, Emma had marched right up to her, held up the rabbit and announced, "This is Mr. Rabbit. He went on Daddy's trip, so Daddy wouldn't be lonely. You can hold him for a minute, but I get him back." And Sophia Bennett, who had negotiated deals worth more than most people saw in 10 lifetimes, dropped to her knees in the middle of the terminal and took a stuffed rabbit from a little girl's hands like it was the crown jewels, and said in a voice barely holding together, "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Rabbit. And you, Emma. I've heard so much about you. Are you the one who said Madison peaks in 3rd grade? I am." Emma studied her with narrowed eyes. Then, apparently satisfied, she reached out and took Sophia's hand. Just took it, the way children do, without ceremony, without armor. The way Sophia had forgotten a person could reach for another person, and said, "Okay, Daddy says you like animals. There's a dog 2 houses down named Biscuit, and he's allowed to be petted if you ask his owner first. Do you want to meet Biscuit?" And over the top of his daughter's head, Caleb Walker looked at Sophia kneeling on an airport floor holding a stuffed rabbit, her hand engulfed in a 7-year-old's. Her careful armor lying somewhere in pieces around her that she hadn't even noticed falling off. And he didn't say anything, because he didn't have to. She looked up at him, tears standing in her eyes, and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." And Caleb thought about a woman in a terminal 6 weeks ago who couldn't understand why he'd help a stranger with no angle, who'd said people like his father didn't exist anymore, who'd been so sure that everybody leaves. And here she was on her knees on the floor of the same airport, being led off to meet a dog named Biscuit by the hand of a child who had decided in the uncomplicated way that only children can that she belonged. It wasn't real yet. Not all the way. There were still hard conversations coming. Still Eleanor to navigate. Still Sophia's fear that would rear up again and again in the months ahead. Still the slow, careful work of 2 broken people learning to trust that the other one would stay. But it had stopped being a lie. Somewhere between a phone call and a stuffed rabbit and a dog named Biscuit, without any of them being able to name the exact moment the thing Sophia had invented in a panic to protect an old woman's heart had quietly impossibly begun to become true. And that night, after Emma was asleep, after Sophia had read her a story in a voice that shook after Caleb had watched from the doorway, with something in his chest he had no words for. Sophia's phone rang. Boston. She looked at Caleb, panic flashing across her face, the old reflex, and Caleb just nodded toward the phone, calm and steady and sure. "Answer it," he said quietly. "It's not a lie anymore, Sophia. You've got nothing to hide from her now. Answer it and tell your grandmother about your day." Sophia's hand trembled as she picked up the phone. "Hi, Grandma," she said. And then for the first time in 2 years, she didn't have to invent a single word. "You'll never guess where I am. I'm in Seattle. I flew out to see them. Emma made me meet a dog named Biscuit." Her voice broke into something that was half laugh, half sob, but it was joy this time, all the way through, real and unrehearsed, and finally true. "Grandma, she's the funniest little thing you've ever—" "No, I know. I know. He's exactly what you said he was at the airport. He's exactly what you saw." And across the room, holding his sleeping daughter's stuffed rabbit, a Navy veteran who had walked into a terminal 6 weeks ago, believing his best days were behind him, stood and listened to a woman tell her grandmother the truth, and understood that sometimes the door you're most afraid of is the only one that was ever going to lead you home. The truth caught up to the lie one season at a time, the way Caleb had promised it would. And by the time a full year had passed since a stranger grabbed his arm in a terminal, there was nothing left to make true. It had all become real, every last piece of it. There were hard weeks in that year. Caleb had never promised her otherwise. There was the night Sophia's old fear came roaring back, and she called him at midnight, certain she was about to ruin everything, certain that a woman like her didn't get to keep a thing like this. And Caleb had driven Emma to the neighbors and gotten on a red-eye and shown up at her door in the dark just to sit on the floor with her, literally the way he'd told Eleanor about at the airport, because he'd decided a long time ago that some things you don't say over a phone. He sat on the floor of her enormous, beautiful, empty penthouse until the sun came up, and he didn't try to fix it, and he didn't leave. And in the morning, Sophia looked at him with swollen eyes and said, "You actually came. I tested it, and you actually came." And Caleb said, "I told you that you could test it as long as you needed to. I meant it." And something in her finally believed him. There was the day Emma called Sophia by a name that wasn't her mother's. Not Mom, never Mom. Emma had a mother and always would, but something Emma invented herself, the way children invent the important words. A name that meant the one who stayed. Caleb had to leave the room when he heard it. He stood in the hallway with his hand over his mouth and cried like he hadn't cried since the small room with the chaplain. Except these were different tears entirely. And he understood standing there that a heart really could break from too much of a good thing, and that it was the only kind of breaking worth having. And there was Margaret. Cold, sharp Margaret, who had cornered Caleb at that airport, ready to destroy him, and instead had asked him not to leave. She came to Seattle 3 months in unannounced, and Caleb had braced for the interrogation to resume. Instead, she'd watched him make Emma's lunch, watched him braid the little girl's hair with his big, clumsy hands, while Emma held perfectly still and trusting. And Margaret had said very quietly, "My daughter grabbed the right stranger." And then, after a long moment, in a voice that cost her something, "I chose myself over Sophia when she was 7. I've never forgiven myself for it. But watching you choose that little girl every single day, watching you choose my girl, it's the closest I've come in 25 years to believing a person can do better than the worst thing they ever did." Caleb had told her gently that she already was doing better, that showing up unannounced to watch him braid hair was itself a kind of choosing. And Margaret had gone to the window and pretended to look at the view for a long time. But the thing about that whole year, the thing Caleb kept coming back to, was Eleanor. Because Eleanor never found out. Not because they kept hiding it. There was nothing left to hide by spring. The lie had dissolved into a truth so complete that the word lie no longer applied to any part of it. But Sophia had wrestled hard with whether to tell her grandmother the whole story anyway. The terminal, the grabbed arm, the 40 minutes, all of it, and it was Caleb who finally helped her see it clear. What would the truth give her that she doesn't already have? He'd asked. She thinks her granddaughter found a good man who loves her and a little girl who needed a mother. All of that is true, Sophia. Every word of it. The only thing you'd be adding is the timeline. And the timeline would only hurt her. It wouldn't heal one single thing. He'd taken her hand. The truth isn't always the facts, honey. Sometimes the truth is what a thing became. And what this became is exactly what she believed it was. So let her keep it. Let her be right. So they let her be right, and Eleanor Bennett lived to be right for 14 more months. She got to fly out one more time the following spring, and this time there was no wheelchair panic, no whispered lies, no countdown. Just an old woman coming off a plane into the arms of a family that was entirely unremarkably real. She got to meet Emma properly, and Emma showed her. Mr. Rabbit and Eleanor told Emma about a sailor she'd loved 50 years ago, and Emma listened with the enormous gravity she reserved for the most important things. She got to sit in Caleb's little kitchen and eat the burnt pancakes he insisted on making her, and she got to hold Sophia's face in her trembling hands one more time and say, "Look what you have. Look what you made. I can go home happy." And this time Sophia didn't cry from fear. She cried because it was true. Eleanor passed in her sleep that autumn in Boston, in her own bed with a photograph on the nightstand that Sophia had sent her. Caleb and Sophia and Emma on the beach, all three of them, squinting into the sun, Emma making bunny ears behind her father's head. The nurse who found her said the old woman had gone peaceful, easy with the smallest smile on her face, and that the photograph had been turned toward the bed angled, so it would be the last thing she saw, and the first thing she'd have seen if she'd woken. She had gone home happy, exactly like she said she would, and when the medal came back to them, Eleanor had left instructions. It turned out, careful instructions, written in her shaking hand months before, that her husband's Navy medal was to stay with Caleb Walker, the second good man, her note said, who kept every promise he made me at that airport. Caleb held it in his rough, scarred palm and understood that he had, without ever intending to become exactly the man, an old woman decided he was in the space of 40 desperate minutes. She had seen it before it was true. And then he had spent a year making sure she was never wrong. They married the next summer, not at the same airport. Caleb had drawn the line there, said an airport was where the story started. But it wasn't where anybody in their right mind held a wedding, but close enough. A small ceremony family only on a stretch of Washington coast, where the wind came off the water the way it used to come off the deck of Caleb's destroyer, back when he was a young man who thought he understood what he'd be protecting. Emma was the flower girl, and she took it approximately as seriously as she'd taken being tree number 3, which is to say, completely. Margaret cried, which she would later deny. And there was an empty chair in the front row with a lavender cardigan folded over the back of it because Sophia had insisted, and no one argued. But it was a full year and a half after the wedding. Nearly 3 years now since a stranger grabbed his arm that Caleb Walker and Sophia found themselves back in the terminal where it all began. They were only passing through a layover on the way to somewhere else. Emma 9 now, and reading a book in the seat between them, her legs finally long enough that they didn't swing above the floor anymore. And Sophia had gone quiet in the way she did when something was working through her, and Caleb had learned by then to just wait to let her get there. And after a while, she reached over the top of their daughter's head and took his hand. "You know what's funny?" Sophia said. "What's that?" "The first time I grabbed your arm right over there." She nodded toward the security gate, toward the exact spot, and it was strange how neither of them had ever forgotten precisely where it was. "I thought I was choosing somebody to play a part. That's all you were to me. A prop. A body that looked trustworthy. I picked you the way you'd pick a suit off a rack." Her thumb moved over his knuckles. "I was so panicked and so alone that I looked at a whole terminal full of human beings and reduced them all to whether they could perform a role for 40 minutes. That's how far gone I was. That's who I was." Caleb didn't say anything. He'd learned that too, when to just let her keep going. "But that's not what I did," Sophia said, and her voice had gone soft and full. "I thought I was choosing a stranger to pretend to be something, but I wasn't. I was choosing the exact man you already were." She looked at him. I didn't invent a good husband and stick you in the role. I reached into a crowd in the worst moment of my life, and I somehow grabbed the one person who was already everything I was pretending to have. You didn't pretend to be a man who sits on floors and keeps promises and loves people slow and careful and all the way. You already were him. I just got lucky enough to grab the right arm. It wasn't luck, Caleb said quietly. No, you said it yourself at the airport 3 years ago. You said you'd been watching people walk by for 20 minutes. Businessmen. College kids. The guy who kept staring. He turned to look at her over their daughter's bent head. You didn't grab the first arm you saw, Sophia. You waited. Something in you was reading every single person who walked past, and it passed on all of them, and it stopped on me. You want to call that luck. I've never once believed that's what it was. He squeezed her hand. I think the part of you that loves Eleanor, the part that would lie to God to protect her. I think that part looked at a terminal full of strangers and knew, before your head knew anything. I think you grabbed exactly who you were supposed to grab because some piece of you recognized some piece of me, and neither one of us had a word for it yet. Still don't really, but it wasn't luck. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. For years I believed losing your wife meant you'd lost your whole shot at being happy, she said finally. You told me that at the wine bar. You said you'd closed the door and bricked it over. You'd decided surviving was the most you got to ask for. I had. And I'd done the same thing. Different door, same bricks. I decided I'd never depend on anybody staying, so I built an empire so I'd never have to. She looked down at Emma, at their daughter reading a book with her legs finally reaching the floor. And we both spent all those years thinking the loss was the end of the story. That the best thing was behind us and everything after was just getting through. Yeah, but it wasn't the end of the story, Sophia said. It was the middle. We just couldn't see it because you can never see the middle while you're standing in it. It always feels like the end when you're in the dark part. Her eyes filled, but she was smiling. Life didn't send me somebody to replace what I never had, Caleb. And it didn't send you somebody to replace Sarah. That's not what happened. That's not what any of this was. What was it then? He said softly, though he already knew, because he'd figured out his half of it a long time ago on a nightstand in a motel room staring at a crooked-eared rabbit. It sent us somebody to remind us our hearts still worked, Sophia said. That's all it ever was. Not a replacement, a resurrection. You spent 3 years thinking the part of you that could love was dead and buried with your wife, and I spent 32 years thinking the part of me that could be loved never got born in the first place. And then a scared woman grabbed a tired man's arm in an airport, and it turned out both of us were wrong. It turned out neither one of us was as dead as we thought. We were just waiting. Her voice broke, but it was the good kind of breaking, the only kind worth having. The whole time, we were just waiting for somebody to reach into the crowd and remind us. Caleb couldn't speak for a moment. He looked down at the medal he carried it everywhere. Now an old sailor's medal worn smooth by 2 lifetimes of thumbs in his pocket. The way Eleanor had carried it in her purse for 50 years. And then he looked at the woman beside him and the girl between them. And he understood all the way down the truth that had taken him 3 years and a stranger's desperate hand to finally learn. The world looked at me for 3 years, he said, and it saw a widower, a single dad, a washed-up sailor with his best days behind him. That's all anybody ever saw when they looked at me. A man to feel sorry about for 8 seconds and then forget. I know, Sophia whispered, and you looked at the exact same man. He turned his hand over so their palms met the way they had in a wine bar 3 years ago, the way they had 1,000 times since. And you saw something nobody else in the world saw. You saw a man who still had every bit of it left to give. You saw me before I could see myself. His voice went thick and low and utterly certain. Everybody spent 3 years looking at Caleb Walker and seeing what he'd lost. You're the only person alive who looked at him and saw what he still was. Sophia lifted his rough hand and pressed it to her cheek the way Eleanor used to. The gesture handed down now, like the medal, like the good name, like everything true that gets passed from the people who loved us to the people we love. Because sometimes, she said, "the person you think you're saving for 40 minutes is the person who ends up saving you," Caleb finished, "for the rest of your life." And down the concourse, right where it all began, a family that had been built out of loss and lies, and one desperate reach into a crowd of strangers gathered their bags and took their daughter's hands and walked out of the terminal together into a life that no one would have believed and everyone deserved. A widower who learned his heart never died. A woman who learned she was worth staying for. And a little girl who grew up knowing all the way down in her bones the one thing that matters most in this whole hard world. That the people who love you don't leave. That some of them, if you're lucky, if you're brave, if you reach into the crowd at exactly the right moment, some of them stay for good.